So, as we begin this week that will end with the celebration of the 4th of July holiday, I wanted to start today with a few words from Alexis de Tocqueville. He was a 19th century French political scientist and historian. And at one time he wrote, I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her commodious harbors and ample rivers, and it was not there. In the fertile fields and boundless prairies, and it was not there. Not until I went into the churches of America and heard her pulpits aflame with righteousness did I understand the secret of her genius and power. America is great because she is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. If America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. It's that word good that struck me as being a very important one to consider this year. And I say that because, we can look around today and so easily see things that we might say are not so great. And I think that many more Americans across the board are taking a look at July 4th, taking a look at our Independence Day with a much broader perspective than in years past. I think that it's a perspective that many are struggling to look at, in that it brings into the picture for us to see the darker side of what took place as our country was formed. Um, of course, there's just the sheer brutality of the war that was. But today, there's a lot of new light, again, being shown upon the treatment of the indigenous people who were living here at that time. That light is also shining very, very brightly upon the fact that the country was literally built on the backs of slaves and the slave trade that was in place at the time, a trade that continued to grow for many years after after our formation. And yet, I think that most would agree that there was also a lot of good coming forth as our country began to form. It's just that over the years, the flaws that existed have not been given the attention that they so rightly deserved. But that's changing this year. This year, much more of the total story of our founding is being brought forth and told. And this brings me back to that word good from de Tocqueville. If America ceases to be good. So I'm inviting us to view that word good today from the spiritual perspective. Whenever there is, just a lot of stuff going on around me, when the reality of my day is sometimes filled with, significant challenges or potential or actual sources of upset, sooner or later I will find that the best thing for me to do is to stop looking around and instead start looking for a purpose, a deeper meaning in what is taking place. And for me, that is only going to happen with the clarity that I would need by turning within, spending some time with that higher power of my beliefs. And so as we do this, as it pertains to that word good, we're guided to expand that word a bit and to see it as inherent good. When we think of ourselves, when we think of every other person, on this planet, our spiritual teachings tell us that all of us, each and every one of us, came into this world with inherent goodness. And we're here to remember that, to tap into it, to bring it forth via the choices we make as to how we live our lives. We don't always succeed. A whole lot of people over the centuries have fallen short at times. And that includes our founding fathers. We've made mistakes as individuals, we've made mistakes as a country, but that doesn't change that underlying spiritual truth that we are still inherently good. I've often heard the phrase being used, the soul of America. The soul of America. Well, if America does indeed have a soul, just like you and I and all people do, then America also has inherent good in her. And as the inhabitants of this country, as we tap into ours, hers is brought forth. This week, bringing forth our inherent good revolves around the celebration of our independence, the celebration of our freedom. And because there are a whole lot of things that you or I, one person, just can't change in a heartbeat, we can begin by looking at how we individually practice our freedom. Because we can do that regardless of what's going on out there, regardless of what anybody else is doing or not doing, saying or not saying. My friend and ministerial colleague, Kelly Isola, she often writes articles and blogs where she details the root origins of the specific theme of her piece. It provides the context from which she then moves forward into sharing her thoughts. And I read one of her blogs where she did this for the word freedom. And I think when what first pops into our mind, a common definition we might apply to it is, just being released from something in some way. But what I found in my reading was that the origins of that word freedom mean power of self-determination. Power of self-determination. So we can begin there, perhaps, by making a very fair assertion that no one else, nothing else, always determines our experiences of freedom. That we might actually have a say in that, which is a very important point to remember. And then Kelly took the word a little bit further, because she noted that, well, when we say that we are free, when we say that we have our freedom, she asked the question, from what? Freedom from what? Do we really sit with that when we think about our freedom? What does being free really mean? And something that has risen to greater awareness today and become a very crucial part of the crucial conversations that we are beginning to have is, and it's something that Kelly wrote about a year ago, is that if I have some form of freedom and someone else does not, do I really have it? Do I really have it? It made me think back to my days in seminary, and specifically to a class that was a required class on diversity. And this particular class was a 2-week intensive. And what that means is that more often than not, when you had a full semester, you were in a class maybe once a week, twice a week. But a 2-week intensive meant that you were in the class every day, and you were given a semester's worth of information in 10 days. And so about midway through that class, the word intensive took on a brand new meaning. There were about, I'd say, a dozen of us in the class. And included in our group was one woman of Asian descent and 2 African American women. And as the day's discussion was taking place, one of the African American women began to speak. And she began to share how the ways of being aware of and honoring diversity that were being presented in the class and so forth, they were not what she had been experiencing on the Unity campus. And the other 2 women immediately began to kind of nod in agreement. They all then began to share how they had felt themselves being looked at differently when others, white people, passed by. That they were not always invited into group experiences and social gatherings as quickly as they saw others in the class, white people, being included. That the qualities that Unity professed to honor and to teach inclusivity, respect, acceptance were often not their experiences. And they raised the question as to why the shadow side, why the flaws of Unity's founding that included segregation and racism, why they were never taught in Unity classes, why they weren't being taught in a seminary class on diversity. We often say that when you're on the grounds at Unity Village, you can literally feel the energy of prayer wherever you go on those grounds. See, prayer is something that's been talked about and taught since our movement began. And so I wonder if what my classmates felt at that time were the remnants of segregationist and racist energies, things that had been buried and left unsaid for decades. So was the sense of freedom I had as I walked the grounds and came into contact with people along the way, was that freedom really mine when it was something that 3 of my classmates did not have? So looking back, I would say that maybe my 3 friends made a stand for their self-determination of freedom that day. And the rest of us, and for me, still continuing today, were given pause to reconsider how we had been viewing ours. I wish Kelly had written her blog back when we were in school. But she didn't. She wrote it last year, and she included a little bit in it about her study of just the word free. And what she found in researching its origins is that free means to love and to think lovingly of and to honor. So what happens as a result of viewing these historical origins, the power of self-determination and to love, think lovingly of, and to honor, is that the good of America that we don't ever want to see cease becomes something that will only continue through our individual choices. And I think that's something that can be a source of great inspiration and courage and strength, because we don't have to get overwhelmed. The idea that we each have to change all these big things going on around us and do it by next Thursday. If we just start here, start with ourselves, we're going to automatically contribute to changing the greater whole. And I believe be much more clearly and easily guided to manageable steps that we can take in order to do so. So what we do is we start taking a look at our perceptions and perspectives, our judgments, our thoughts, our feelings. We look at how all of them are being expressed in relation to what's going on around us. And maybe even more important than that is how they're being expressed in relation to what's going on inside of us. I shared, I think it was 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks ago, a little bit about my own process right now, as it pertains specifically to racism and inequalities. And I spoke of how much I know I don't know. And I shared how I do know I have not been an ally for those impacted, as a result of my silence. And in just these beginning days of self-reflection, self-exploration, maybe a little bit of self-determination, taking place, there have been a lot of feelings, and there have been bits and pieces of self-judgment coming up in me. There have been, feelings of sadness and guilt, feelings of failure and ignorance, struggles with knowing that I will never be able to truly understand so many of today's challenges, literally because of the color of my skin and how wrong that feels. There have been angry thoughts. There has been embarrassment as I remember some of the ugliness of racism and bigotry that I heard from members of my family growing up, people who were in the position of being role models for me. And so in addition to just diving into a couple of books right now. My practice is also one of perspective, trying to maintain a perspective that has an image in it of making friends with all that is calling for my attention. And also one that includes images of things like inherent good and forgiveness and healing. Because I do believe that the more we heal ourselves, the more healing that takes place for all of us, and that would include our country. Now, Kelly said that this idea of making friends with that activity going on inside us is just another way of saying to honor that one of the two parts of the definition of the origin of the word free. There was an Egyptian pharaoh. His name was Akhenaten. He was from the 14th century. And he said honor is the inner garment of the soul, the first thing put on by it with the flesh, and the last thing it lays down at its separation from it. Now more than ever, honor is something that needs to become a part of our conversations. It needs to become a part of our lives. It has to become a part of our story. And it's honor that I see as being imperative in two ways. One, as a noun, and second, as a verb. Honor as a noun can be defined by a number of other qualities that we have at our disposal, like honesty and integrity, decency and respect, principles, values, that righteousness that de Tocqueville spoke about. In our expressions of freedom, are these qualities being called upon by us? Are they what we are thinking about before we start speaking, before we start acting, before we start interacting? And when the time comes for us to begin expressing honorably, have we taken a moment? Have we taken that moment to call upon our inherent goodness, that highest self of us, and say, come on, I'm with you, but you take the lead and guide me down only honorable pathways? And once we start taking those steps, are we now the verbs of these qualities? Are we being respectful? Are we expressing decency towards others? Are we living, breathing, moving, acting models of what we say we believe? Are we valuing others' opinions and perspectives as much as we want ours to be valued? And I ask these questions because once we step outside of ourselves and begin engaging with others, we need to remember that our actions impact others. That all of us are we are interconnected with one another. And so we need to be as aware as possible how our actions will impact and what effect it will have on those interconnections. We are having so much difficulty today in so many of our relationships and our conversations, personally, professionally, politically, as a country, as we look at this whole idea of freedom in a new way. And I think that's why honor really has to have a seat at the table. If we're going to find levels of understanding and healing and compromise and change that is change for the betterment of all. As we've been going along, you may have sensed the makings of a paradox coming forth. Because on the one hand, we say that there are so many big things that one person just cannot change. And on the other hand, that one person matters. And what he does, what she does, impacts all life. It's not just about them. It's not just about you or me. Now, Kelly sees that as an eternal paradox that she will forever dance with, in her words. But if she's going to dance, I'm going to call it the country two-step. where one step is love and the other step is honor. See, it's a dance of what Kelly saw as being the purest form of freedom, that being our individual and our collective power of self-determination. If America ever ceases to be good. Alexis de Tocqueville found the secret of America's genius and power in church pulpits that he described as being aflame with righteousness. Well, I took a look at that word righteousness, and in doing so I found two words, there's many, but two words that can be used to define it. And those two words were blamelessness and goodness. As we continue the difficult conversations we need to have around so many issues today, it's not hard to see, it's not hard to fall into the blame game. Pointing fingers at each other, harsh words being spoken and shared, often no one moving any closer to center. But when we let go of the blame and we take that step of love, we stand a much better chance of making some progress. And as for goodness, especially the inherent goodness we do speak about in church, that we are speaking about today, well, that has the full power of spirit behind it, which can only bring forth even more and greater good. Author Christina Baldwin once offered that spiritual empowerment is evidenced in our lives by our willingness to tell ourselves the truth, to listen to the truth when it's being told to us, and to dispense truth as lovingly as possible when we feel compelled to talk from the heart. It seems to me that that is exactly where we are today. This is where we find ourselves today. Looking back over the course of my life, I have not been able to remember one time, not even one time, that I was told our country was not great. And I know that that feeling of greatness didn't just start when I was born. And I know that it didn't come about because we never had any challenges. We are in a tough time. We are in a very tough time right now. One where some of our country's darker side and current flaws are being exposed for everyone to see. And for some, that's nothing new. They've seen it happen before. But for our younger generations, it's something that's a first in their lifetime. But just because we're struggling, just because we have some flaws and we as everybody, has some dark sides to us, none of that diminishes or let alone eliminates our inherent goodness. And so this Saturday, I'd like to ask that you consider spending part of your 4th of July holiday tapping into the spiritual power that resides within your inherent goodness, and find just one way to offer a little bit of that inherent goodness into this world. And I will join you because I want to be one small part of that collective whole that has determined that it will do all it can to make certain that this incredible country of ours never ceases to be great. And so blessings to you for a wonderful celebratory 4th of July this coming weekend, and God bless you.